Welcome to our Bible study again this Saturday. I look forward to spending some time with you on the book of Genesis in our time today. And we're going to skip around. We're going to skip over a couple of different things and go through the storyline as it is. But there are a couple of passages because I want to make sure we're actually getting to the main stories that I may gloss over a little bit. So don't be surprised if that happens. I have to do my usual spiel, my usual beginning, and let you know I would love to come and visit you. And currently, I can come and visit you every day of the week. And I don't think you want me to come every day of the week to you in your apartment specifically. Maybe you do. I don't know. 7 days a week might be a little bit excessive, but that's is to say I don't have to just come on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays anymore. This coming week, in fact, I will probably come a couple of different times and see several people and then knock on some other doors while I'm there. So don't be surprised if you get a random knock on your door and you see a masked man who's wearing a hat. See, I should have worn my hat so that you could see. Yes, I look forward to seeing you. And this coming week, I'm off of work at Ivy Tech. We have our fall break, so I have some extra time to come out and see people at Beltrace. But I would love to come and visit you because it's been quite a while since I've seen some of you. And I want to say thank you in particular to all of you because of the video that you produced for me. I'm producing these videos every week, and I have, as some of you know, gotten a couple of celebrities to do some videos for my Ivy Tech classes. And I got Jamie Farr from MASH to do a video for us here at Beltrace. And that was a lot of fun. But I was very touched, very moved for National Pastor Day, I think it was, that I received a video on Facebook, and it had many, many masked people from Beltrace talking to me and talking about me. And I thought that was very lovely. And in the world of celebrities, you are all the celebrities in my life. And I thank you immensely for that. And of course, you are celebrities that I can come and visit. So I would love to come and visit with you sometime soon. So please let me know if I can. Again, the best way to do that is to let Melissa know, and she can get me a message, but we'll do the best we can otherwise. Just so you know, I have a little bit of a scratchy voice because this is about the 5th video today that I've made. So my voice is beginning to falter a little bit. So if I take the occasional drink of water here, I have my water bottle handy, and I have my Gatorade handy over here too. Well, can we see it? Yes, there it is. It likes to disappear on the screen. And so don't be surprised if I need to take the occasional drink just to keep things lubricated as I'm going along. Also, don't be surprised if we have a cat join us, because for several of my videos today, the cat has decided that he wanted to sit up here, right here in front, or on my lap, because the weather is starting to get cooler outside. And whenever the weather gets cooler, the cat wants to snuggle. He doesn't have any ideas about, oh, he might be too busy to snuggle. In a cat world, there's nothing more important than that. Well, maybe food is more important than that, but yes, he is quite insistent at times. But the last I saw him, he was actually downstairs between some of the bookshelves. He seems to like the Biblical Studies and Jewish Studies section best. There's a chair between those two, and he likes to lie on that chair and it's warmer right now in the basement, so that's not a surprise. As I mentioned before, we're going to look at the book of Genesis, and as we have been, and we're going to be looking a little bit at Abram as he becomes Abraham, and we're going to look at Sarai as she becomes Sarah, and we're going to look at a couple of sort of lead into much bigger stories. We're coming up fast on the sacrifice of Isaac story. We're not going to get there today, but we are coming up fast on that. So I want you to keep that in mind and keep that sort of as the context as we're looking forward. Because last week we saw Hagar give birth to a son. And I'll repeat a little bit of that. We're in chapter 16 where that happens. It says, Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of the son whom Hagar bore Yishmael. And Abram was 80 years and 6 years old when Hagar bore Yishmael to Abram. So he was quite advanced in years. But one of the things that we see is God continues to be in Abram's life. And at the beginning of chapter 17, it says, we're sort of fast forwarding now more than a decade. It says, when Abram was 99 years old, Yahweh, God, was seen by Abram and said to him, I am God Shaddai. Walk in my presence and be wholehearted. I set my covenant between me and you. I will make you exceedingly, exceedingly many. Now, here are a couple of things to keep in mind about that passage here. We have two different names for God. First, we have Yahweh, which is often translated into English as Jehovah. And then we have Shaddai. Now, those of you who know me know that I like Star Trek. And those of us who like Star Trek know a Vulcan salute, which goes like this: live long and prosper. And that was done first on television by a guy named Leonard Nimoy. And Leonard Nimoy played Spock, the guy with the pointed ears. Well, he came up with that gesture, that hand gesture, on his own. He wasn't given it by the director or by the writers. He sort of came up with that. Live long and prosper, I believe, came from the writers, but his sort of hand gesture, when you do that, say live long and prosper, was not from there. He got that from his synagogue experience. And he recounted a wonderful story where when he was a child, he was taken to synagogue by either his father or his grandfather. And at the times of the prayers, you sort of cover your eyes as God passes by. You'll see this in many movies and shows that depict Orthodox Jewish people at prayer. You often will cover the eyes. And he was told, don't look at what's going on there. And he said, of course, being a young boy, he looked. And one of the things he did was he saw the people up by the Torah scroll up at the front, holding their fingers out like this. And you can't see both my hands, so I'll just do this one. They were holding their hands out like this towards the congregation. And he said that he learned later that is symbolic of the letter in Hebrew, Shin. And Shin is the beginning of Shaddai. And that is one of the ancient Hebrew names for God. It's often translated into the English word Almighty. So translating this more in the King James Version, we might say that when God spoke to Abram, he said, I am God Almighty. Walk in my presence and be wholehearted. I set my covenant between me and you. I will make you exceedingly, exceedingly many. And that's repeated in there. I'm not stuttering. So that live long and prosper, being exceedingly, exceedingly many, is prospering exceedingly, exceedingly much. And of course, Abram being 99 years old, as verse 1 tells us here, he's already lived long. So this all fits together. I thought it was quite a remarkable thing that this particular translation, again, the translation I'm using here is the Everett Fox, 5 Books of Moses, and he has kept that word in there so that you know it's closer to what the original of the Hebrew was. And my commentary on this, why is the word exceedingly used twice? And the commentary says the chapter echoes with repetition, exceedingly, exceedingly. And that's in both verses 6, which is here, or verse, this is verse 2, but it's also repeated in verse 6 and 20, and it's always referring to the fruitfulness of Abram's descendants. You and your seed after you, for the ages, the covenant with the land, and into the generations. This is all preparatory to Abram's assumption of fatherhood, of an individual and of a people. And his name is changed, as is that of his wife, Sarai, into Sarah. This act is of the utmost importance in the biblical world, since a person's name was indicative of personality and fate. The receiving of a new one signified a new life or a new stage in life. So we see this happening in other places too, like Jacob will become Israel, or Jacob will become Israel. So we see this here. Abram is becoming Abraham, Sarai is becoming Sarah. So it's not just Abram, it's also his wife. That's significant too. And we see God as bringing out perhaps more of a fullness of who God is and what God is to Abram by using not just the old name El, which we see in the beginning, the very first chapter of Genesis, and the word Yahweh or Jehovah, which we see in the second chapter. Now we have another, Shaddai, God Almighty, which is pretty close, but the word isn't used in there, for God Most High, who is that guy Melchizedek, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago before as well. So at verse 3, after God says, you will be exceedingly, exceedingly many, Abram fell on his face. God spoke to him, saying, as for me, here my covenant is with you, so that you will become the father of a throng of nations. So no longer shall your name be called Abram, but rather your name shall be Abraham. For I will make you Av Haman Goyim, or father of a throng of nations, or father to a multitude of nations. So it's what we're seeing here. In Hebrew, often an im is used for plural rather than s, like in English. If you're making a plural, you add an s to it, or an es. So wish, wishes, trick, tricks, treat, treats. We're in October, so tricks or treats there. But here we see that his name already ends with an M, so it gets a syllable added, so that we see a different aspect of him there. At verse 6, it says, I will cause you to bear fruit exceedingly, exceedingly. So again, we have the double exceedingly, exceedingly. I will make nations of you. Yes, kings will go out from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations as a covenant for all the ages, to be God to you and to your seed after you. I will give to you and to your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan as a holding for the ages, and I will be God to them. So here we have a promise, and the promise ends up with a particular act, a particular physical act that is then expected of those of the covenant. And the rest of this passage talks about the act of circumcision, which is still a practice that is done to this day. Male children in the Jewish tradition have a bris, which is very soon after birth. That was not always true in the ancient times, and that was not necessarily true at this time for Abraham now, and his now at least teenage son, Ishmael. So we see in other ancient cultures, this was often a rite of puberty or a rite of passage rather than an infancy practice. But here we see that it is one of the things that is to be practiced. It is specified in Genesis that this is done on the 8th day. So from the text, it says the 8th day, but in other cultures, it was sometimes a puberty rite. And so it's not unknown in the ancient world outside of these, the Jewish custom. But the 8 days is probably more unique. Can I say more unique? More likely to be in the Abrahamic tradition along the way. At verse 15, it says, God said to Abraham, and now it's referring to him as Abraham in the text, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, for Sarah, princess, is her name. So we have this change for her because she will become the mother of many nations, just as Abraham is the father of many nations. I will bless her, and I will give you a son from her. I will bless her so that she becomes nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. But Abraham fell on his face and laughed. He said in his heart, to 100-year-old man shall there be children born? Or shall 90-year-old Sarah give birth? But he's calling her Sarah now, not Sarai. That's just, I don't know how many times I read this passage in my life before I realized that even though he's laughing about it, he's sort of taking God at his word already by calling her by the new name. I think that's significant. Abram said to God, if only Ishmael might live in your presence. God said, nevertheless, Sarah, your wife, is to bear you a son. You shall call his name Isaac. He laughs. Did you know that was a translation of that name? It was something that I learned later in my studies, that is a translation of the name. So we have laughter, we have Abraham laughing, we have the name there, and we're going to see Sarah laugh here in just a moment as well. I will establish my covenant with him as a covenant for the ages, for his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I hearken to you. Here I will make him blessed. I will make him bear fruit. I will make him many, exceedingly, exceedingly. There's that repetition again, exceedingly, exceedingly. So it's not just through Isaac, that we will have the continuation of Abraham's line and God's blessing. We have, I will make him blessed. So he's not being cast out. He's not being thrown away. He's not being discharged. It's just some people have different blessings. And we know that full well in our own lives. I am blessed with many things. A good singing voice is not one of them. I used to make jokes, and I still do sometimes when we're doing things, but especially when I had to lead our singing in chapel when we did not have a musician. And I would tell people that I really needed their singing to be with me so that we were singing as a group, because I can't carry a tune in a bucket. Now, here's the thing. We had a member of our congregation named Louise, and some of you may remember Louise. And Louise was a music teacher for about 40 years for the New York public school system. And she taught music to elementary, middle school, and high school students. She knew I could carry a tune because she knew well enough as she was listening. What she also knew was, despite the fact that I can carry a tune, and see, I always knew I could carry a tune, there's something in the tonality and timbre and quality of my voice that makes it not a great singing voice. And she asked me once, she said, now, I know you can carry a tune, and I think you know that too. And I said, well, I do. And I said, I know I don't have a good singing voice, and I want to have people sing with me to be prepared. And she said, well, yeah, your voice isn't that good. She was honest. She was honest about it, and I was too. I knew that wasn't one of my blessings, but it worked for me to get everyone to sing along with me and to tell people that I wasn't the best singer by saying I couldn't carry a tune. I actually could carry the group mostly, but I really needed their voices to make it sound better. And by people thinking that I didn't have a good voice, it gave them the freedom to also sing without having a good voice. At least that was my reasoning. So your mileage may vary. I'm sure that there are many of you, as you think about the blessings in your lives, you think about, I'm blessed in this way, or I'm blessed in that way. And that there are many things that we can look around and say, well, I can't do that and I can't do this. I was not blessed at sports when I was a younger person. I was very tall. So when we moved to Indiana and they said, oh, you can join our basketball team. And I'm like, yeah, you really don't want me to join your basketball team. And I was the tallest kid in my school for a while, and I wasn't on the basketball team. And that's almost an unforgivable sin in Indiana. But I was not nearly as good as the guys who had been raised playing basketball. See, I came to Indiana late, so I had not been raised playing basketball. So that was not one of my sports. There are some things that I am blessed at. I am blessed to be a curious reader. I'm blessed to be a rather good student, which I continue. And I think one of the things that we're called to do is to find out what our blessings are and use those to the fullest potential. And that way we may be exceedingly, exceedingly, just as we've seen here, exceedingly, exceedingly a lot in this chapter, conforming to what God wants us to do. And if we worry too much about not being blessed in that other thing, we can squander our own talents. And I think Jesus has a parable about talents and how we use our talents, or whether or not we don't because we don't have what other people have. We use what we've got in the best way. And that's what God is saying here to Abraham. He's like, Isaac's going to have this blessing. Ishmael is going to have that blessing. They're both going to be blessed. They're both going to be fathers of nations. They're both going to be exceedingly, exceedingly loved by God. In verse 20 again, it says, we're talking about Ishmael here, he will beget 12 tribal leaders, and I will make a great nation of him. But my covenant I will establish with Yitzhak, with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at the set time another year hence. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from beside Abram. And Abram took Ishmael his son, and all those born in his house, and all those bought with his money, all the males among Abram's household people, and circumcised the flesh on the same day as God had spoken to him. So here we're seeing that the covenantal mark and the inclusion in the family is being extended to Ishmael as well, even though he is going to have a different blessing and a different destiny. Now at chapter 18, get ready for more laughter. Now Yahweh, we're back to Yahweh, Jehovah as the name, was seen by Abram by the oaks of Mamre, as he was sitting at the entrance to his tent at the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and saw here 3 men standing over against him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the entrance of his tent and bowed to the earth. He said, "My lords, pray if I have found favor in your eyes. Pray do not pass by your servant. Pray let a little water be brought, and then wash your feet and recline under this tree. Let me fetch you a bit of bread that you may refresh your hearts. Then afterward you may pass on. For you have after all passed your servant's way." They replied, "Do thus as you have spoken." So Abraham hastened into his tent to Sarah and said, "Make haste, 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and bake bread cakes." And Abram ran to the oxen. He fetched a young ox, tender and fine, gave it to the serving lad that he might hasten to make it ready. Then he fetched cream and milk and the young ox that he had made ready and placed it before them. Now he stood over against them under the tree while they ate. This must have taken quite some time to go from a living ox to being prepared on the table, kneading the flour into bread and baking it. They must have been there for a while. I know I get impatient when I'm waiting for the microwave to go for a minute or two. So it's a very different world. It's a very different world back then. How many of you remember when you would spend an entire day cooking and baking and other things? And now if we take half an hour to do stuff, we tend to think it's too long. The world has changed in many ways. This was a major undertaking, a major preparation. Verse 9, they said to Abraham, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" He replied, "Here in the tent." Now he said, "I will return, yes, return to you when the time revives, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in days. The way of women had ceased for Sarah. Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have become worn, is there to be this pleasure for me? And my Lord is old." But Yahweh, God, said to Abraham, "Why does Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I really give birth now that I am old?' Is anything beyond God? At that set time I will return to you when time revives, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah pretended otherwise, saying, "No, I did not laugh," for she was afraid. But he said, "No, indeed you did laugh." The men arose from there and looked down upon the face of Sodom, and Abraham went with them to escort them. So here we have sort of the segue into the next story, and we'll get to the next story. That'll be our final bit for today. But I want to stop here. We've had laughter. We've had laughter. We've had Abraham laughing, and yet in his laughter, still recognizing what God has said, because he took the new name of Sarah. Even in his laughter, he took the new name and put it to use as the right thing to do. Then we have Yitzhak, Isaac, he laughs, as the appointed name for the son who will be born. And then we have Sarah here, listening in at the tent. We have to wonder about the ethics of whether she was supposed to be listening in at the tent door or not. But they didn't have radios and televisions back then. They didn't have cell phones or even landlines back then. So what are you going to do? You're going to keep yourself busy, and new people stopping by, you're going to be curious. So we won't fault her too much for that. But they're talking about her, so all the more reason for her to be listening. And she thinks it's too late for her to have children, so she laughs. Now, sometimes the translations I have read just say she laughs. This one, in fact, says she laughed within herself. That's in verse 12. It says Sarah laughed within herself. So that's more of an internal thing. And yet God knew she laughed. In verse 15, it says she pretended otherwise, saying, "No, I didn't. No, I didn't laugh. I didn't laugh." And of course, if she only laughed inside of herself, she could actually technically be true, telling the truth. But then God says, "No, you did. Yes, you did laugh. No, indeed you laughed." I've seen this translated, again, different ways. This particular one says, "No, indeed you laughed." Other translations I've seen have essentially just said, yes, you did laugh, or yes, you did. And it's sort of, there's almost a playfulness here, because she's afraid, but God is putting her at ease. It's like, nonetheless, you did laugh. I've seen at least one translation with nonetheless. That seems too formal to me, because it's more like, oh, yes, you did. I heard it. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And of course, those of you who know that I have a background doing some comedy here and there, whenever there's laughter in the Bible, I want to focus on that. In fact, I should write a story. I should write a paper or something about all the times that laughter is mentioned or comes up in the biblical text. I'd probably have to go through a bunch of different translations to figure out, because sometimes people don't want laughter. There was a wonderful book, became a good movie as well, by Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose. And The Name of the Rose is set in a medieval monastery where the main task of the monks is to be copying books. They didn't have photocopiers, they didn't have printing presses. The way you got a book was you essentially took the book and you sat down with your scrolls or your parchment paper or whatever, and you hand copied it. It could take a long time. Thus, there weren't very many books. And there was one book in particular by Aristotle, who was considered in the late Middle Ages to be the greatest thinker in history. And he reportedly wrote a book on comedy. And there were some of the monks in this monastery who did not want that book to ever see the light of day. Because if someone as profound and great a thinker as Aristotle was saying that it was okay to laugh, then people might actually laugh at inappropriate things. They might even laugh at God. But there was another, not monk, there was another figure in the book. He was a friar, a Franciscan friar, in the movie, named William of Baskerville. Baskerville as in Hound of the Baskervilles, Sherlock Holmes. It was a wonderful tie-in, because there's a murder mystery going on also in this movie and book. And he looks forward to the laughter. He thinks laughter is what makes us uniquely human. Animals, he said, don't laugh, but we do. Now, there are some laughing hyenas, but the impulse of laughter, the understanding of comedy, is something that is much more attuned to those of us who are human. And human beings in the biblical text in Genesis are created in the image of God, and therefore laughter becomes part of that. So here we are being called upon to watch Abram, watch Sarai, see the naming of Isaac, all involving laughter. But then we go off to a more serious event. At verse 17, the three men who have come are leaving. Abraham goes with them. At verse 17 it says, "Now God had said to himself, 'Shall I cover up from Abraham what I am about to do? For Abraham is to become a great nation and mighty in number. And all the nations of the earth will find blessing through him. Indeed, I have known him, in order that he may charge his sons and his household after him, that they shall keep the way of Yahweh God, to do what is right and just, in order that God may bring upon Abraham what he spoke concerning him.' So God said, 'The outcry in Sodom and Gomorrah, how great it is, and their sin, how exceedingly heavy it weighs. Now let me go down and see if they have done according to its cry that has come to me, destruction. And if not, I wish to know. So I think I've mentioned once before, I had a professor who once said, anytime Sodom and Gomorrah gets mentioned in the text, probably not going to be good, because we now have a very negative reputation on the communities. But here we have God going to investigate. I've heard this cry. Is it true? So verse 22 says, the men turned from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood still in the presence of God. And Abram came close and said, will you really sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? Perhaps there are 50 within the city. Will you really sweep it away? Will you not bear with the place because of the 50 innocent that are in its midst? Heaven forbid for you to do a thing like this, to deal death to the innocent along with the guilty, that it should come about. Like the innocent, like the guilty, heaven forbid for you, the judge of all the earth. Will he not do what is just? God said, if I find in Sodom 50 innocent within the city, I will bear with the whole place for their sake. And Abraham spoke up again and said, now I pray, I have ventured to speak to my Lord, and I am but earth and ashes. Perhaps of the 50 innocent, 5 will be lacking. Will you bring ruin upon the whole city because of the 5? And he said, I will not bring ruin if I find there 45. But he continued to speak to him and said, perhaps there will be found only 40. And he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. But he said, pray, let not my Lord be upset that I speak further. Perhaps there will be found only 30. He said, I will not do it if I find there 30. But he said, now pray, I have ventured to speak to my Lord. Perhaps there will be found only 20. He said, I will not bring ruin for the sake of the 20. But he said, pray, let my Lord not be upset that I speak further just one time. Perhaps there will be found only 10. He said, I will not bring ruin for the sake of the 10. God went as soon as he had finished speaking to Abram, and Abraham returned to his place. So here we have Abraham bargaining with God, sort of holding God to a standard that we expect God to already adhere to. So in a sense, Abram is not really asking God to do something other than what God would have been doing all along. So we see in all of this, we have a sort of a stylized issue of a back and forth, a bargaining, a banter that comes back and forth. This is something that is not uncommon throughout the Middle East, throughout Northern Africa, throughout Central Asia in marketplaces. It's expected that you will bargain. It's expected that you will haggle. In fact, there's a Monty Python movie, I think it's Life of Brian. I think that's the one that it's in, where Brian is going through the marketplace and he needs something, and the merchant tells him what the price is, and he's like, oh, okay, and he's going to pay for it. And he's like, don't you want to haggle? And he actually calls the authorities over and says, this man won't haggle. So sort of knocking the price down. And of course, Brian just wants to take the thing and go. He doesn't want to haggle. And I think sometimes people who aren't used to that circumstance, who aren't used to that happening, are sometimes uneasy with it because they think somehow they're being cheated. But in fact, it's part of the regular negotiations, and you typically drive a hard bargain kind of thing. And that's not something that we typically do anymore in most marketplaces. You might still do that at the farmer's market or somewhere where you have people selling their own produce and eggs and flowers and other kinds of things like that. I've done similar things like that. And in fact, it may be, I'm trying to remember if that is the case, it may be that this book came from one of those, because in my past academic career, I've gone to conferences called AAR-SBL. AAR is American Academy of Religion, SBL is Society for Biblical Literature. And they have thousands and thousands of people who come to these, especially when they have both of them at the same time together. They have this big book hall. And anyone who knows me knows that that's just about the closest thing to heaven for me. So they have all the publishers with all the latest books. Most of the salespeople there have flown in from somewhere else, and they now need to fly back. Who wants to carry this big book back? They're willing to bargain. They're willing to, and in fact, a couple of times I've had people just give me books because they didn't have room and they didn't want to carry them back, and they thought they were going to maybe sell more, give away more, stuff like that. So I didn't have to drive a hard bargain for this book. And I have a number of books that are like that. But there also is a certain minimum. And we know that Abram stopped at 10. And we know, since we know the rest of the story, that there weren't even 10. But I'm jumping ahead, and that's where we're going to go next week. So I will see you then. Thank you again for being here for our Bible study. And I will repeat just one more time. Let me know if I can come and visit you, because I'm now available per Bell Trace regulations every day of the week. Bye-bye.